Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. And good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Happy 2026. As Rachel said, my name is Katie Steen-James. I'm the Senior U.S. Policy Manager for the Open Source Initiative, or the OSI. We are a nonprofit and we have been the stewards of the open source definition since the late 1990s. And what I'm going to talk about today is how OSI's work has kind of expanded in the last few years to focus, continue still focusing on the benefits of open source and, of course, approving licenses against the open source definition. But we've also expanded to work more on public policy and Europe and the US. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So these are kind of our main projects. The licensing and legal, which I think most people are probably aware of. That's what I mentioned earlier with approving licenses against the open source definition. Our policy and standards work, which is what I'm going to mostly talk about today. And then the advocacy and outreach, which is also part of what I'm going to talk about today. But this is just kind of a general overview of the projects that we have at OSI. So, as I mentioned, the OSI approved licenses, which is probably what most of you know the OSI for, is something that we continue to do. We have a license committee that approves and reviews licenses that are submitted to the committee against the open source definition. So we continue to do that. But on the policy side, I wanted to just briefly kind of talk about who we are. So, as I said, my name is Katie. I'm the Senior U.S. Policy Manager. I have my colleague Jordan, who is my counterpart in the European Union. And then I think many of you know Simon Phipps, who has been in the community for a very long time and in a part-time capacity continues to work on European standards for us. A person who is not on the slide, but who I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is also Deborah Bryant. She was leading the U.S. policy work in a part-time capacity before I was hired. Just under a year ago. And Deb has also stepped up as the interim executive director for OSI and continues to support us on our public policy work as well. So OSI went from having two part-time folks with Simon and Deb, and then hired Jordan and myself. We are both full-time to really expand the work and impact on policy side of things. So, what are we actually doing and what are our roles? I wanted to just share kind of a paraphrase from a blog that I wrote, which is on our website. There's the link there that essentially encapsulates what we're doing, what our roles are. And really, it's to educate policymakers about the benefits of open source software, track policy developments, and ultimately just ensure that open source developers can continue doing their work. So, this is really for the community. We want to make sure that you can continue doing your work. And part of that is making sure that people know about the benefits of open source, understand how it works, and a lot of times don't inadvertently do something that doesn't necessarily intentionally restrict open source, but accidentally does. That's often what happens. So our role is to make sure people understand how open source software works. And then also, we continue to promote our definition of open source AI. I think, again, most folks in the community are very aware of our open source AI definition and the process that we undertook to do that, releasing it in October of 2024. So, what we continue to do now is make sure that policymakers and civil society organizations know that the open source AI definition exists. That's, I think, one of the biggest challenges is just awareness, especially with how quickly the AI kind of ecosystem is moving, and then encourage any AI policies to at least have the open source AI definition as a foundation. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the open source AI definition later and kind of what we're hoping to do in the future, but just wanted to also make sure that everyone understands that's still part of what we're promoting in our public policy work as well. So, activities. This entails meeting with lawmakers, responding to public consultations, requests for information, Public consultations in Europe is typically what it's called. Request for information is typically what it's called in the US context. Continuing our leadership and engagement on standards, specifically in the European context, which is Simon's portfolio, coalition leadership, both informal and formal, and then developing and sharing educational resources on the intersection of open source and policy. So this might be on security issues, it might be on AI, but making sure that we have resources that are short and tailored towards policymakers to help them quickly understand the open source impact. So, our present focus and goals. For Europe, and I don't want to spend too much time on this only because I could never do the job as well as my counterpart, Jordan. But I did just want to give you a rundown of what him and Simon are working on. Again, promoting the open source AI definition, CRA implementation, making sure that it's open source software friendly, standards with open source in mind, informing lawmakers about open source, and then continuing to strengthen the network that they have in Brussels, making sure people in Brussels know what the OSI is. Another one here that I didn't include on the slide, but I should mention is just implementation of the AI Act. The Code of Practice is something that Jordan is very involved in, trying to make sure that the open source voice is heard. So that's another part of that work as well. In the United States, we're also promoting the open source AI definition, working to strengthen the Open Policy Alliance. The Open Policy Alliance is an entity of nonprofit organizations that want to learn more, participate in U.S. policy discussions. I implore everyone, if you're a nonprofit organization, you want to get more involved in U.S. policy work, that you join the Open Policy Alliance. It is free to join. I lead that kind of coalition or organization, and we're really looking to strengthen it since it was created in 2023 through more regular meetings and engagement at both the federal and the state level on open source policy issues. Also, monitoring implementation of the White House AI Action Plan and the White House AI R&D strategy, and engaging in public comment. I'm not going to go too much into detail on what the White House AI Action Plan is, but it was released in July, includes a number of provisions. Some of them actually directly call out open source and open model AI systems. So one of the things I'm working on is tracking how different federal agencies are implementing that. They have also put out a public comment that we responded to with the Open Forum for AI out of Carnegie Mellon University on what an AI R&D strategy should include. They haven't released that strategy yet, but we'll also be tracking that. And we suggested that they look at the benefits of open source AI and what it brings to transparency and innovation as well. The other is tracking security provisions in federal legislation and the potential impact on open source software. I think we're all aware of the questions that come up around security and openness. So what I'm checking to make sure is that these large bills, particularly the big defense policy bill, that is one of the few pieces of legislation that the US Congress does pass every year, checking to make sure there's not any language in there that would hurt open source software in terms of security. And then the last one, which is a little bit new for us, is tracking state legislation, specifically on AI and the potential impacts on open source software. We have seen, considering there's not been movement at the federal level on regulations for AI, a lot of states have been interested in pushing their own regulations. And so sometimes we've seen language that may try and put restrictions on downstream uses of an AI system or software within an AI system, and having no kind of carve out or exemption for open source. as we know, putting restrictions on open source software downstream doesn't make sense. That's not how the licenses work. So in that part, we don't have a position on regulating AI or not, but we just want to make sure that people are aware as they consider AI regulations what the potential impact might be on open source. So an example of what that looks like that I worked on is this resource, which you can find on our website. And it's basically a two-pager, not lobbying, but an educational piece for policymakers, specifically in the US, to consider when they're thinking about AI regulations. We want to make sure they consider the impact on open source software and don't put restrictions that would impact open source licenses. And again, that comes back to some of the same approaches we've tried to make in Europe with differentiating between the developer and the deployer, that these liability, if there is any, should really be on the deployer, and we don't want it affecting upstream open source developers, which could have a chilling effect on the development. And then lastly, as I said, I did want to mention what we're hoping to do next on the open source AI definition. So as you know, it was released in October of 2024. What we're looking to do in the future and this year is continue to monitor the AI space, look at use cases of AI systems that actually meet our current definition, learn a little bit more about who releases what, under what conditions are they releasing them, what's happening outside of large language models and generative AI. We know there's other AI systems out there that are not LLMs. They might meet the definition. It's just hard to keep track of all the things that are being released these days because it's moving so fast. We also have a collaboration with a Duke master's student, Gabriel Toscano. He was also an intern with us over the summer, who is working on research on the prevalence of the use of the word open in AI models and what licenses are used in those models. We also want to establish an expert working group to evaluate specific model releases. And then this will lead to evolving that expert working group into a community-led entity that OSI is not leading but would be part of, that stewards updates to the open source AI definition, run a process for addressing some of the issues that came out after the release and that have come up since then, and then hopefully release a new version of the open source AI definition. And that is my last slide. I think I'm right on time. So I just want to thank you for listening, and I'll go look at the chat. I had not been following it now, and happy to respond to any questions in the chat. So with that, I think I'll turn it back to Rachel.
Perfection. Thank you so much. That basically what I've been thinking while you were talking was, wow, a lot really goes into open source, and you exposed but how long was it? Like 15 minutes of what you do. I mean, it's amazing. It's global. Um, it's important. I guess I want to say that yeah, that it's important, and that, well, do you need help? I'm guessing maybe. I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, no, I think in the US in particular, the Open Policy Alliance, which I mentioned, and I'll put a link in the chat. It's free to join. If you're a nonprofit, a couple of folks, Deb with the Python Foundation and Ruth with Apache, they are members of the Open Policy Alliance. So I would just really encourage folks to join that. You can reach out to me at my email or go onto our website and see how you can join, because it's free. It's not a heavy lift, and that allows, especially maybe under-resourced parts of the open source community who don't have enough money to have an in-house policy person, can still engage, because that's what my role is. So would really encourage folks to join that.
And do you interact with OSPOs a lot?
Yeah, so through the Open Forum for AI, which is a effort led out of Carnegie Mellon, which I mentioned we had done some public comments with. That's kind of the academic side of open source, wanting to try and bring the academic perspective to these open source AI
Sure.
conversations, in addition to like government conversations in industry. They represent a lot of OSPOs, university OSPOs in particular, but then also OSI engages with OSPOs that are in industry within companies as well. So yeah, that's a big part of it too. Something I'm really interested, which it kind of just depends, is OSPOs in government. The United Nations, obviously, it has a big
Yep,
push on that, but I've even suggested that to some state lawmakers of this is a great way for you to get the most out of open source to serve your citizens. So
for
that's
sure.
another part of the OSPO world that I think we could use even more kind of engagement on is within government.
Maybe we'll do an OSPO event later in the
That'd be
year.
great. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. It's
You're
not
welcome.
nothing to put together a presentation and then show up. So, if anyone has any questions for Katie, put them in the chat. We're going to have recordings of these after, so make sure that you share them. So, Katie, with that, farewell.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Okay. That was really great.